Okay, guys, I'm going to vamp here on this just a little bit. It's another thought process on these parts that we have, like perfectly built granite sarcophaguses and um, granite, and all the way from limestone to granite, having perfectly drilled holes through it. And this man shows one variation of it, and I think people have tried that and then looked at the cores, but I'll get into that a little more here. Let's get started here.
Inside their coffins, flowers were believed to protect them for an eternity, and granite, so they believed, provided the ultimate insurance. On the Mohs scale of 1 to 10, granite is a 7, making it at least as hard as steel. Just how...
Now, that's a true fact, and so you know, how would you cut this? And they give you this idea of diorite balls and how somebody could beat this thing into where would have a sheen on it, like what you see right over here at the edge. I mean, it's almost a mirror-like sheen on here, and this is, you know, thousands of years old. So at the time of doing it, it had pretty much a polished mirror sheen on it. You know, what you would say is a slight matte finish or a bar top finish type thing, perhaps, but I mean, it still has a sheen to it now. That's that well. Let's continue.
How they were able to hollow out a piece of rock this hard was a question for ancient technology expert Dennis Stocks.
You know, one of the most difficult things that the Egyptians had to do, the very
Now, you see a pre-drilled hole right there that they've already got started, and you see a few that are already made, and some smaller ones right next to it there. You can see that little guy down here. And so this, let me see if I can even fold it out just a hair more for you. And you can see this little hole that's right down here below my pointer, and where they're fixing to go into this hole here. Now this has got a brass sleeve on it. That's all it really is, a brass sleeve or a copper sleeve that they've made, and they've put it inside of a wooden dowel, and the wooden dowel has a little bit of some rub notches in it, and that's all it really is, and kind of a grippy surface on it that's not well polished, and the areas around it are kind of beveled back in to keep the rope kind of in that area. All right, and then it's got a topper on top of it, and they've basically take a rock with a convex on it, like a dent up in the rock, and they take the top of the wood and make it to where it has a point on it like a stake, and they hold on to it. I've got something to say about it, but I want to show you more of this so we get the concept down.
Process is, how did they drill the holes in solid rock?
They go around twice.
This is the way that they did it. First of all, they had a copper tube which had a shaft of wood driven part way into it so that there's a space in the tube underneath. Then they could get the tube in position, and the cutting agent is just common desert sand. So that's...
Now, I've got another idea here. Let's say they get so smart that they realize that perhaps the quartz part of granite, which if you look at granite when it's polished, you can easily tell that there's black and clearish and red specks that are in it and blotches. And what if they figured out that that granite was much better and more abrasive? Because what you're asking it to do is to embed itself kind of into the bottom of the copper, and once you get this thing going, it'll get a little warm, and it'll run into it, and it'll start gouging into it. Now, they're not adding water in any way to this thing, but I'm thinking the thing I'm going to say in a minute might add a little water to it, might help keep it from getting too hot. I'm not sure. Let's look at this.
You're just pouring sand in there so that the copper has a sharp edge to cut.
Yes. Now, we've got a long bow here with a rope on which is...
And I just want to show you that he's got a hole, a dent inside that rock there, and then this nipple point up here on top of it. And they're just going to try to hold this tight while these guys zip back and forth like a saw. Okay? Now, thoughts come to mind that if you were to be able to build some type of tripod device over this with lashing across it at this height right here, you could put this thing on top of it with some other cross members to it, right? And then set a 50-pound weight on top of it. And also, imagine if you took, and let's say this rock right here was a rock that had a hole going all the way through it that you'd already done, and you put it right here, and so it sleeves up in it, and then the other rock that you set on top of it has the nipple topper too. So now we're really, I mean, not that we found this setup in any way, shape, or form, people. I'm just saying, comes to mind that if you had it sleeving like he's doing with his hand right there, where it's holding it like a yoke, or like you see inside of a union joint, or like in your transmission and the axle going back where it goes through that ball bearing setup thing there, if they took and cut one and then reamed it out just a little bit to where the pole fits through it and set it over it and sleeved it right at this height, and then set that on top of it with a 50-pound rock on it, or even the 50-pound rock has that point into it, and maybe they have it up higher. Well, it's got to go down through there, so as it moves, they're going to have to keep changing and moving this. What if they put the sleeve down farther and then put inserts in between here, then the rock on the top, and then the weight on it, and as it goes down and starts to stop making noise, they basically lift off that rock, take out one of the discs, put the rock back on, and keep going. And watch what they do here with this.
Be given a double turn around the shaft. Now, there's only one component to put in place. Can we put the top capstone on? Now, this is just to put in position for the shaft to rotate in while the bottom rotates in the hole. So if you'd like to take hold of this...
So this is what...
Yeah, just hold.
Now you can imagine, look at both of these guys trying to hold this, so it takes a double thing to do it, or some big strong guy to be able to do it, and it's still yanking and pulling, yank, pull on you. But you could probably set up a tripod here in some way that really recreates these two guys holding it, and perhaps a third giving you that triangle of points there onto it, or a square that these guys are standing in between that has a long crossbar across it. You know what I'm saying? You get the idea? But watch how they pull back and forth on it, and I've got a little more to add.
Don't put any pressure on, and while the two operators turn the drill, the sand is now steadily and slowly but surely cutting its way right through the stone. And the only limiting factor is our strength and the length of the copper tube.
And he said it correctly there. The only difference is their strength and the length of the copper tube. But you can also tell that the copper tube has to be the length of going all the way through the shaft, because the wood thing is inserted into it. And so if it's inserted into it, say it's a 5-inch tube, you can only go through 4 inches, 3 inches maybe worth of rock, because you've got that wood shoved in there. So you'll have to have a 3-foot long tube go through a lot of these holes that we look at for it to make it through, or you have to be smart enough and badass enough to make it through both sides, and they don't really show that effect really. You see, you have to have some kind of hollow situation in the center that's just the thinness of that thin copper tube, or it wouldn't make it. Now here's the other question: how did they make that badass thin perfectly round copper tube? Right, well, I thought what if they took a core, and they take the core and they actually flatten it out, and then they bend it around that core and superheat it up and do the little thing that they do with their brazing deal and pound the thing out, and then bam, you know, and then pound it from there a little bit and get it edged and so on and work it from there. Well, we don't see that seam really on them. In fact, the ones that we found almost look seamless, like they're almost forged that way, but it's so thin they couldn't be. There has to be something else to it. And now there's just more damn questions, but let's watch one more moment of this, and I'll tell you something else. You can see it has an oscillation only of a few spins.
Why? Because you're only drilling the circumference of the tube out. The core...
As it spins around, there's that white part that's on it right here, and you can tell that it doesn't even quite do a full rotation before it's pulled back the other way. Now these guys could take slightly longer strokes, but let's take a look at this.
You'll be knocked out later, and you're left with a whole super technology. It really is.
And so they, you know, that sounds great, but so this is the setup again here, guys. And what if we were playing tug of war instead, right? What if we're playing tug of war instead, and we've got a machine that's the guys I'm talking about in the place with the weight sitting on top of it. And now one or even two people or three on either side tug of war. That rope isn't just a one size of a longbow, but it's actually, oh, I don't know, they got 10-foot rope on either side. And now they're able to lean forward and pull way back and lean forward and pull way back. And now you get at least 3 or 4 circumferences of that copper thing, perhaps more. Oh, it's easily more, because it would be a chundle. So it'd be like raw, 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 and it would just be going back and forth, really eating into it well. And if you use that quartzite, and you had the guys in place, not where the men are here, but instead you had a quadrupod or a tripod setting the thing up, A-frame-ish style, with a weight driving down onto it, now you can do it. I still question, because something has to keep it exactly still. And so this that they're showing here is bullshit. I mean, it's just not going to work, because they wiggle too much. And once they get down into it, they start wiggling around a whole lot, and it just eats into the side of the pipes and causes all kind of problems. And the holes that we see show you that these people had it down a little better than that. And so the guys that are pulling and pushing here apparently aren't causing enough force and yaw back and forth on it to make it do a funny thing down through there. And they show this spin revolution, and it takes something that's going to have a lot harder spin revolution than what we see. And you see these little bitty lines that cut down through it, and then that little bitty line effect. I don't know, maybe I ought to look at one of these real quick. Let's see. And there's another one that I saw that I even had. You can see the deal here. Here's one that I had where it shows some core holes on it.
All right, we're going to look at a few more parts here.
I'm going to cut out my own voice here. And but there's one of the big monoliths that are there, and I go off on it and start talking about things. But seeing you look at these holes they got here, and this driven down hole, and how crisp the edge is here in the starting point. Okay, but you can see that just maybe an inch, inch and a half deep, they were getting off just a hair and then ran down from there, and it never got disturbed after that again and continued to run. And it doesn't look nasty down in there. It doesn't look like they did this 5-6 times and couldn't get their crap together, but it ran pretty smooth. Perhaps they have a starting bit they get going with, they get going down an inch with the next one, then they have the bigger tube they put on there and drive it all the way through. I mean, there's a few different scenarios I can think of how to make that come about, but you can see that lip that I go in there. And in the video I show you, I talk about how that lip's formed, and you can tell somebody had slightly gotten off, but also shows you that they weren't off by a millimeter all the way down to that, and then they vented in, kind of torqued up, if you will, and it goes all the way through, and it looks pretty smooth. And this isn't even your best example in any way, shape, or form, but you can see me kind of pointing it out, and I say right here, and there's a lot of holes that go through a lot of the harder stone, and when it goes through the harder stone, it definitely looks to be a whole lot more precise even, and it's a smooth drill through. It's got a lot of texture to it, and it's got lines built into it that just don't seem to come across as being the machining the way they talk. You can see some of these, they shine light through here and stuff, and of course Brian Forrester's got a lot of vids on here. I've got one that I did here recently with this guy with his like devil horn little things on his mask doing this temple thing and driven through there. And this is that black stone that's just so hard and yet so smooth. And you find that Sumerians have all that stuff. And then, you know, what about this thing here? It looks like an old car wheel. You know, let's say, oh, well, it had touch pads on either side, and then the top of it, it had a little Game Boy going on, and you could play games while you're riding when you put it in autopilot. And this is the old things that, you know, people make up all kinds of crazy things. Look how smooth this hole is. It's here. That's that drill that I just showed you there. But I just looked up, you know, Egyptian holes. I could have put in something even better than that, but I just grabbed that off of it to show you, because the thought come to mind that what if they were really pulling and pushing and going? But then that still doesn't explain how this, if you'll look, is grafted right off in a thin sheet. Shink, just knocked out. And these pieces right here, jink, you know, taken out of there, that almost looks like something. And And look here, can you see it in the video? Let's see here. Let's just look at that there. So these holes, you can see there was a mistake made here, and that's got to be 8 inches down that pipe, right? But there's a slight variation here, and there's a slight variation here, and maybe that's each time they had to stop and do a little something, add a little water, whatever they got going on they're doing. But it doesn't get off much, and this thing grinds through at a fast rate. It's not like, well, after a couple of hours we got an inch, you know. It doesn't. It looks like it just went like through this thing was like it was butter. And you look at this over here, and you can see the lines that are cut on the horizontal here, almost like something that had a combed effect to it with teeth. It's just taking that right off, like if you were to set up an A-frame type thing and then have some way of coming along and scratching that off, you know. And you could go over it and over it and over it again with a weight sitting onto it, and you start planing like planing on a door. But that doesn't explain the application in a lot of the versions of this either. So I'm just kind of, you know, baffled there. But I did have that idea that nobody's shown here yet. You know, instead of just saying it's a little rope, it's something a whole lot more. I've got another concept I'm going to show you shortly where it's got a the idea is that there's a power wheel inside of the pyramid before they finished it off at all, and in using counterweights and a lot of ropes, they would let a block go and let it pull down, and as that did, it would set off this power wheel, and if you pushed a rock into it on a sled just right, maybe lined up with rails and things, that you could cut off that thing due to its centrifugal force that it's got going on it, then somebody's going to have to wind it all the way up and put blocks onto it and do it again and do it again. I don't know if that justifies very much of what I've been looking at though either, but it's another conceptive idea. I mean, I kind of take it out of 2 different things I saw, and then where are you going to do this thing and how are you going to get that thrust? Well, how about that falling chamber in the pyramid right there? And it shows you where they can lock in things so they could get it up, 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 and then let that thing go and whoo, almost like a kid spinning a top. You get some good granite in there with a good force on it, and it's got an edge built into it. And we haven't found this giant sun disk with this, I don't know, 8 to 12 foot radius they must have on this thing to end up getting to pull like this, but that doesn't mean it doesn't exist. Of course, it starts to sound a little far-fetched. You might as well call on lasers and things, but not so much. I mean, I'm trying to pull off reasonable things here on the channel, people. Anyhow, I thought I would just bounce that off of y'all. Have a good one. Peace.